Will this documentary absolve the alleged crimes of its subject matter? I would say that there is no chance in hell. Here are my immediate thoughts on Netflix's Mr. McMahon. Hey everyone, this is Lenny here. So I just finished watching the Mr. McMahon Netflix docuseries, the 6-part docuseries that was just released this week. This obviously covers the topic of Vincent J. McMahon, the former owner, CEO, and creative head behind WWE World Wrestling Entertainment, formerly World Wrestling Federation, the WWF. And this is a bit of a crazy documentary, not crazy in terms of like crazy things that's happened, but just more or less in terms of the time frame. So when this originally was put together, when all the interviews were originally conducted, it was 2022. And this was actually before a lot of the allegations against Vincent McMahon had come out. And if anyone's been following the news, you know, there's been a big federal investigation into Vince McMahon in terms of sexual allegations, a lot of really deplorable, crazy, insane stuff going on there. The lawsuit with Janelle Grant and some of the other hush money payments that's gone through, all that stuff has kind of been exposed. All that stuff kind of got exposed after a lot of the interviews in this documentary had taken place. And the documentary itself, before every episode, gives us a disclaimer that, you know, a lot of these interviews were conducted before the release of, you know, all of the scandals and everything going public and everything like that. So, like I said, this is a 6-part docu-series. I think each part was around an hour or so, and they each in their own way kind of chronicles a piece of Vince McMahon's life, starting from his childhood and growing into the big mogul that he would eventually become, owning WWF, buying that from his father, and turning it into a national and eventually an international promotion and everything that went on with that. This documentary, I will say, is very in-depth from the standpoint of someone who is an outsider. So if you are someone that is not a professional wrestling fan and does not know a lot about the story of Vince McMahon and the story of WWE in essence, there's going to be a lot for you to chew on. Vince McMahon's life and the existence of the WWE in itself is a wild ride in itself. And Vince's upbringing and him moving up in, you know, the world, things that he decided to do to challenge the wrestling industry, things that he did that were, you know, just not standard, that were controversial. And the docu-series does get into all that. So if you're a newcomer and don't know a whole lot about Vince McMahon, like I said, there's going to be a lot for you to chew on. If you are a hardcore wrestling fan, like myself, if you're someone that follows WWE, or if you've been a wrestling fan like most of your life, a lot of the subject matter in this documentary, honestly, is not going to be new material. For me, pretty much all of the points that were hit on this documentary, I already knew as a fan. So if you are coming in as a fan, there isn't going to be a lot of new ground that's really going to be broken. There's a lot in here that you are already going to know in regards to Vince on the come up, buying the company from his dad in '82, creating WrestleMania, the risk that came with it and everything like that. So if you're a wrestling fan, there's going to be a lot that you already know, but I will say the docuseries in itself was very well made, very well structured, very well paced, and was very engaging, even as someone who does know pretty much everything that this docuseries revealed. It was still very engaging, very entertaining, and I think a lot of that had to do with not just the through line story of following Vince McMahon throughout his entire career, all up into the sexual allegations, but just the sheer number of individuals that this documentary or docuseries was able to get to participate. We got Dave Meltzer, who was that was going to be a given. And Dave Meltzer is sort of the kind of the bigwig when it comes to the dirt sheets. The dirt sheets being kind of like, how fans find out about the behind the stage going-ons of, any professional wrestling promotion. It was sort of the king of that, at least in modern day. Now he sort of is the king of the dirt sheets. But yeah, he's one of the big talking heads. The Rock, major talking head. John Cena, major talking head. Triple H, obviously, major talking head. The Undertaker, major talking head. We also got, obviously, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Stephanie and Shane McMahon, Linda McMahon, Bret Hart, Booker T, Tony Atlas, Cody Rhodes, Paul Heyman, Wendy Richter, Chris Nowinski. We got a lot of major talking heads. I am going to make note, though, of some of those that did not participate that I was actually kind of surprised that they weren't there. So, for example, no Mick Foley, no Jim Cornette, no Vince Russo. I might have an idea why those two particularly, but Jim Cornette especially, I would think might have had something to say. Maybe Vince Russo, because he did have a lot of say in regards to the Attitude Era, but I'm going to assume that either he had wanted nothing to do with this documentary, or maybe Vince and WWE was like, no, these guys, avoid like the plague. We don't want them anywhere near. But it would have been cool, honestly, because it did seem like this documentary tried to take a more objective approach to everything and kind of let everyone say how they felt unfiltered. So I would have been, it would have been cool to see Jim Cornette and Vince Russo particularly share their thoughts on everything. No Brock Lesnar, no Ric Flair. No Kurt Angle, which I really felt that was a missed opportunity, because I think Kurt Angle has a lot to say and contribute. No Roman Reigns, which is the biggest omission. The fact that you had your longest reigning WWE champion from the modern era not taking part in this docuseries. I don't know if that says more about Roman Reigns or more about Vince McMahon, if it was really just a matter of timing, because Roman was, basically the guy and whatnot. Who knows? But that was the most glaring omission that I noticed. This documentary or docuseries really, again, goes through the entire career of Vince McMahon. And like I said, it is in 6 parts. The first part just really goes through, his childhood, just very briefly. He still kind of keeps things close to the chest when it comes to his childhood. He really just says pretty much what was repeated in the Playboy interview that he gave. I want to say it was sometime in the early 2000s or so. But he basically, he grew up in North Carolina. He grew up dirt poor. He was abused by the boyfriends of his mother. There is some mild allegations that he might have been sexually abused by his mother. All that stuff comes up. Again, these are things that most wrestling fans, hardcore wrestling fans, already do know. But for those that aren't aware of Vince McMahon's past, that's how he kind of came up as someone that was a child of abuse. And it gets into, Vince McMahon Sr., coming into Vince's life when he was basically 12 years old and was like, hey, I'm your dad. And Vince was like, hey, whatever it meant to get me out of this abusive situation, because I wanted to get the fuck out of there. And you kind of get that sense that, Vince always wanted to get out of this poor situation that he was in and wanted to be someone that wasn't that poor boy that was always picked on and beat up on and abused. So it almost was like this, this father, his real father, coming into his life almost gave him permission to change up his entire persona. And it gets into, him trying to impress his father and his dad essentially bringing him into the fold of the WWF. And, everything like that. So, it gets into all of that. It gets into Vince McMahon purchasing the company from his dad in 1982. There are actually a few things that the docuseries didn't get into that I was actually kind of surprised, especially in light of the Vince McMahon allegations. For example, the plane ride from hell. If anyone knows about that, this was a very infamous plane ride post an international tour that the WWE performers were on. I think this was 2002 or 2003, and a bunch of absolutely insane shit happened. Ric Flair, for example, was stupid drunk, exposed himself in front of the stewardesses. I think Brock Lesnar got involved. Vince McMahon obviously was involved. It was just horrible PR. So I'm actually kind of, surprised that the docuseries didn't really get into that. But it does get into a lot of other things. So like I said, the first part does get into Vince, coming up and to that first WrestleMania, which was a big risk that Vince McMahon took. He wanted to take the promotion of the WWF and turn it into a national promotion. At first, we hear about the territory system that pretty much started out in the 60s and 70s. There were all these different territories in Florida, Georgia, Mid-South. Toronto had one, Calgary had one, Bret Hart. There were Portland, Southern California. There are all these different territories, and all these different territories had their own champions or their own roster. And Vince McMahon, being someone that wanted to take his promotion nationally, had a very, let's say, deft, ruthless way of, taking his promotion nationally. He went to all of the other promotions and basically poached all of the best talent. So if it was like Junkyard Dog, who was like in Mid-South, or Ted DiBiase or Hacksaw, I think they were all Mid-South wrestlers. Or if it was Roddy Piper, who was up in Portland, or if it was someone like Bret Hart, who was over in Calgary Stampede, Vince McMahon paid, good money for those talents to come from, those smaller promotions and move to New York or up north, which is where the WWF called home. And so we see all of that, and it builds up to the first WrestleMania, and Vince McMahon basically taking a 2-day vacation. And because Linda McMahon was like, you're going 100 miles an hour ever since you bought the promotion from your dad. You haven't taken a day off. You need to take a break. So Vince is like, yeah, I'm going to take a vacation. And 2 days later, he comes back with the idea for WrestleMania. And Linda's like, oh, you didn't take any vacation at all. What's wrong with you? So yeah, that first episode ends with the creation of WrestleMania and its success and everything like that. The second part, which is absolutely hilarious, you actually see all of Stand Back. Pile Driver, the album, that's what it was. And it was a bunch of WWF wrestlers. They had their own songs. This is where Jive Soul Bro came from. Pile Driver was Coco Beware's song, and Vince McMahon had his own song, Stand Back. And he performed it live. It was a howl. It was hilarious. They actually showed this in the second part of the docuseries. And it gets into, the second part gets into the success of the WWF post WrestleMania. Also, obviously gets into, the rise of Hulkamania. That was in part one, and Hulk Hogan was a major talking head. Also, another major talking head that was not in this that I want to note is Jesse Ventura, because there was actually a big stink about Jesse Ventura trying to start up a wrestlers union, and Hulk Hogan basically ratting him out and basically making it so there probably will never be a wrestlers union. But yeah, that was another major talking head that was not in this document. But the second part, deals with the fallout of WrestleMania. They talk about WrestleMania 2, the 3 locations in Nassau, the Rosemont Horizon in Illinois, and Los Angeles, and how that wasn't a big success creatively. It was a success financially, but it wasn't a big success creatively. And then the lead up into WrestleMania 3 and Vince McMahon, basically convincing Andre the Giant to come back for this big payday, saying, hey, I'm going to give you the biggest gate in wrestling history, and then everything leading up to WrestleMania 3 and how big of a success that was. So the second part goes into how the WWF was just kind of just rolling and firing on all cylinders, and WrestleMania 3 was kind of this benchmark and really put WWF on the map as this major pop culture phenomenon that really took hold of the public zeitgeist. And as a wrestling fan myself, this was my era. This is when I really was getting into professional wrestling as a big time fan. Now, there is one thing I will say. The documentary does mention Donald Trump. And obviously, Vince McMahon and Donald Trump has had a friendship / rivalry on and off, on screen in terms of like their characters. But it actually doesn't get into how far back that they have actually known each other, because Donald Trump hosted WrestleMania 4 and 5 from Trump Plaza. It completely skips that, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know if they didn't want to put too much of a connection between Vince McMahon and Trump, who knows? But I thought that was interesting. But it does skip right into, how Hulk Hogan wanted to become, big time in Hollywood. So he and Vince McMahon hold themselves up in a hotel room for two days, and they come back out with the script for No Holds Barred, which, No Holds Barred is a guilty pleasure movie, but it's not a good movie at all. And I think even Hogan and Vince even kind of, mentioned that. It gets into WrestleMania 6, which I was there. That was my first WrestleMania, and the Ultimate Challenge. They basically say, hey, we tried to pass the torch to Warrior, but it just wasn't, it just didn't work out. And they tried to pass the torch to a few different people, but it didn't work out. They get into the whole thing with WrestleMania 7 and Sergeant Slaughter and the whole Iraqi turncoat situation, Slaughter getting death threats. They get into all of that and having to turn things back around to giving, the title back to Hogan, and Hogan kind of being the face of the company, even though it seemed like that there was some Hogan fatigue and business was starting to downturn. So it gets into all of that and, got into a lot of Vince's competitive spirit and nature. And this all leads into the steroid trials of 1992. And things were riding high for Vince at this same point, because he started the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation, which flopped hard. And part of that is because of the steroid scandal. And basically it was, there was a doctor from Pennsylvania, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was basically prescribing and selling steroids. And I do, appreciate that basically all the talking heads admitted that, yeah, steroids were rampant. It was a thing that you did. It wasn't so much an expectation as much as it was like, well, if Vince says we need you more often, or we need you to change a certain character or whatever, there was an expectation that you needed to bulk yourself up if you're going to be like, the guy, or if you're someone that got injured, it was expected that you were hurt. Steroids helped a lot with the healing process, especially, with working out and everything like that. There was this big crackdown in the wake of the Reagan era and the Just Say No war on drugs, and there was a crackdown on steroids, with it being put as I think it was a Schedule 3 illegal substance. And so there was a big trial where Vince McMahon was accused of selling illegal steroids to the WWF roster, and everyone, all the talking heads that were around in this, they all said that Vince did not sell steroids. And the big thing too was, Hulk Hogan going on the stand, and the federal government had him as their big star witness, but he actually turned on the federal government. It was like, yeah, Vince did not sell me steroids. Steroid use was rampant backstage, but everyone took steroids on their own volition. No one was pressured, no one was forced, and Vince certainly did not sell those steroids. So Vince McMahon was, found innocent of those charges, and obviously made him feel pretty invincible. And then with them saying that Vince feeling, was starting to feel pretty invincible, that's when we get into the Monday Night Wars. We reintroduce Ted Turner and reintroduce Eric Bischoff into the fold. And how things were kind of going on into a downturn for WWF because of the steroid scandal. That really, hit WWF really hard in terms of business. At the same time, Ted Turner, becomes the flag bearer for WCW, signs Hulk Hogan. And that was a big deal. Well, again, Eric Bischoff gets into the fold. And, the big great story is, Ted Turner having that meeting with Bischoff and is like, what can we do to compete? And Bischoff was like, we just have to go head to head with him, I guess. And Ted Turner was like, hey, give Bischoff a couple of hours prime time on Mondays. And the Monday Night War starts, and then we get into the whole 83 weeks thing, where Monday Nitro, WCW Monday Nitro would defeat Monday Night Raw in the ratings for 83 weeks. That's obviously a big story. And we get into all of that. Again, these are all things that are very familiar to wrestling fans, but it also sheds light on Vince's competitive spirit as a young child, as an impressionable youth, as someone that has daddy issues and always wanted the approval of his father, and was ruthless about things. And the rise of WCW, Mighty Nitro, the turn of Hulk Hogan with him turning heel, with the start of the NWO, with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall jumping ship to WCW, all of that stuff, forced Vince McMahon to have to become more creative with the WWF and become more reality-based. They had to move away from a lot of the more cartoony, kid-friendly nature of their shows. And so we get into the start of the Attitude Era, Austin winning King of the Ring. We do get into, how the Attitude Era started, and they pinpointed at a particular Raw taping where Vince McMahon was not at. And Shawn Michaels came out in biker shorts. This was actually a pretty famous segment. He comes out in biker shorts and he has like this huge bulge in his crotch area. And I think Bruce Pritchard was like, oh yeah, it was like a wadded up ball, ball of socks or something. And Shawn Michaels was like, it was not socks, it was gauze. That was actually pretty funny. But they pinpoint that as sort of the start of the Attitude Era. But they get into the curtain call where Triple H, Shawn Michaels, who was WWF champ at the time, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall all got into the ring together post match, a tag team match, and they kind of gave themselves a big hug and embrace. This was immediately before Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were jumping ship to WCW, which kind of broke the illusion of, who were the good guys and bad guys. And Triple H, as a talking head, was like, hey, we're trying to tell Vince that the times are changing and people know that pro wrestling, even though we're not saying it's fake, but they know it's predetermined. They know that these are storylines and we have to change with the times. So there's a lot of that going on as well. They get into the rise of Degeneration X, Steve Austin winning King of the Ring that Triple H was supposed to win because, Triple H got punished for the curtain call, so Steve Austin wins instead. He cuts one of the most infamous promos of all time. Austin 316 says, I just whipped your ass, and gets into the whole, rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin. We get a little bit of stuff about ECW and how Austin made a stop over there. Paul Heyman obviously has a talking head there. And I did find it a little funny. There's one particular instance where Vince is asked a particular question. I think it's about Sable. And Paul Heyman is in the background. And I'm thinking to myself, was Paul Heyman there strategically to help feed Vince certain answers? Because it was very strange that Paul Heyman, of all people, was there as sort of a surrogate for Vince McMahon while he was, conducting the interview. I thought that was very interesting. Talked about ECW a little bit. Really didn't get too much into it, obviously, because this is a documentary that focuses a lot on Vince McMahon, but it did get into a lot of, the Monday Night Wars and what that all entailed. It would get into the Montreal Screwjob, and this was the formation of the Vince McMahon character. We get into the whole, Bret Screwed Bret promo that aired the night after Survivor Series 1997. Bret Hart jumped ship to WCW at that point. And we kind of get into, how Vince felt about that. Bret Hart was going to be seen as sort of a lifer for WWF. And, after Hulk Hogan left, Vince was trying to find someone else who was going to be the guy. And at the time, it seemed like Bret Hart was going to be that guy. He offered Bret a 20-year contract, but Vince realized that, with WCW at the time really kicking their ass financially, it just wasn't working to keep Bret on, for that long of a contract. So he actually encouraged Bret to hey, go to WCW, make your money. But, there's the whole, controversy. Bret wanted to would have been willing to lose the title, but he didn't want to lose it in Canada. At the same time, there's the big friction between him and Shawn Michaels. He didn't want to lose it to Shawn Michaels. They had the whole thing where it was going to be a schmoz ending, but there was this whole, backstage meeting between Vince, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels, and Triple H is like, fuck him. It's your belt. It's your title. Take the title off of him. There are scenes from Wrestling with Shadows, the docudrama that followed Bret Hart, which was really cool actually seeing that. Also, if you are a Canadian wrestling fan, there's a lot of interview footage from an old show called Off the Record. God damn it, I can't remember the host's name now. I just lost his name. But he would do a lot of interviews with pro wrestlers, especially from WWF. And he would do a lot of hard-hitting interview questions with Vince McMahon and a lot of the WWF rosters. So as a Canadian wrestling fan, seeing a lot of those clips was actually pretty cool. Also, Trish Stratus was a talking head. She talked about how she absolutely hated the Montreal Screwjob. Also, with Trish Stratus, they talked about the bark like a dog segment where she stripped, she barked like a dog, she was humiliated. I've always gone on record to say that segment has never sat well with me, but Trish Stratus herself set the record straight, and she was like, this was a storyline. I was willing to do whatever it took to make Mr. McMahon the heel as hated as possible. Even though I say that it still felt like a really weird extension of the Vince McMahon persona, and they all say the most successful professional wrestlers are those who are themselves an exaggeration of themselves, or themselves with the volume turned up to 11. Steve Austin says that, The Rock says that, Triple H says that, Vince McMahon admits that himself. So that's one of the big things with this particular documentary, is a study of trying to figure out, where does Vince McMahon the person begin and Mr. McMahon the pro wrestling heel character ends. And that's the thing with professional wrestling, the lines of reality and fiction are always blurred and always intertwined, and it's always been that way from the beginning with professional wrestling. It's always been this performance art where there's this unspoken contract between performer and audience, where we know, yes, what we are seeing, in the ring is performance and is storytelling, but we also are aware that a lot of it is stemmed from real life. And especially with the current landscape that Triple H dubbed the reality era. He coined that term in 2014, where we do see a lot of real life things kind of happening, whether it's something on social media and they turn that into an angle, or someone gets injured and they turn that into an angle. That's something that's really prevalent now. And, that was something that Vince McMahon really took to heart, especially during the Attitude Era. And then we get into, stuff with Sable and how she was a major mainstay in a lot of the treatment of women. You get a lot of the talking heads saying, it was a different time back then. And even I say, I remember watching, a lot of this stuff, and I was, being whether I was like a 16, 17-year-old boy and watching this stuff and being like, yeah, this is awesome. And now as a 45-year-old, man, I'm just like, yeah, some of this shit just did not age well. The documentary goes into all of that, then into the Ruthless Aggression era, the rise of John Cena, Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, Batista, and how things had to shift in that respect. And this is also, his post-sale of WCW and ECW, Vince McMahon buying up both companies. This is right before WrestleMania X7, and we also get into the family dynamic of the McMahons. How Vince envisioned, Shane and Stephanie, how he seemed to be always harder on Shane. Even though it seemed like Stephanie had the better business acumen, Shane always wanted to be one of the boys, while at the same time, Stephanie was always discouraged from dating wrestlers, but she wound up, dating Triple H in the weirdest way, from the angle that was born out of, Triple H drugging Stephanie and marrying her, which was back then just a wild storyline that, again, is one of those things that just hasn't aged well. But out of that, that's how Triple H and Stephanie fell in love. And Shane McMahon, was super against it, even though Vince himself was like, Stephanie, if you're going to date a wrestler, I mean, it would be someone like Triple H. It was almost like Vince kind of pushed them together. Also, at the same time, it gets into, some of the wildest angles in terms of the interpersonal relationships of the McMahon family. Stephanie turning down, and it does come up, turning down the incest angle. Vince, from his own lips, says, yeah, there was an idea I had where Stephanie was pregnant and I would have been the one to impregnate her. Stephanie's like, yeah, there was an angle that I turned down. They didn't get into that. They also get into Trish Stratus possibly being punished at WrestleMania 22 for not going through with the full-born lesbian angle that she had with Mickie James. And that was a big match. Mickie James had a big moment at WrestleMania 22, but Mickie James turned down that kiss, and 1 week later she loses the women's title. And she's like, yeah, I was probably punished for that. It gets into the whole thing with Ashley Massaro and her allegations that she was raped at Tribute to the Troops taping, and there was no investigation, even though she sadly committed suicide years later, and things come back up, and that does not look good. And then, we get into everything in terms of Vince's legacy. And this is where episode 6 comes into play, and then the shit hits the fan, where those that are handling the docuseries says the allegations comes up, and then boom, Vince is gone. He disappears. We do not hear from him the rest of the docuseries. And again, we hear all of these different talking heads talking about what's going on with Vince McMahon. But again, none of the sexual allegations had come to light yet, except for two particular individuals, Dave Meltzer and Bruce Pritchard. With Bruce Pritchard, they interviewed him and they asked him about an early cut of the Mr. McMahon documentary, and he said he hated it. He said it was a hit piece. And he was like, all you guys did everything to make Mr. McMahon look bad and make him look like a piece of shit. And then it says, there's a caption 2 days later, all of the allegations comes out and the floodgates open up. So Bruce Pritchard, those comments, they didn't age very well. And then they have Dave Meltzer come back in. They bring him the whole thing about, Vince stepping down in 2022 in light of the first set of allegations, and then him forcing his way back in. And Meltzer saying, that's what I expected. I expected Vince to come back. Cody Rhodes is a talking head. He's like, the fact that people were surprised that Vince came back is what was really surprising to me. And I think for a lot of wrestling fans, Vince forcing his way back in light of those allegations originally wasn't surprising. It pissed a lot of people off, me included, but it wasn't surprising. But then when the floodgates did open with all the hush money payments, I think it was like 12 to $17 million over a period of like years. The floodgates open. Vince had to step down at this point. And also, we get into the whole sale of WWE and, Paul Heyman getting into the kind of the Shakespearean tragedy of, the expectation that Stephanie or even Shane would have been the heir apparent to Vince McMahon, but he wound up selling the company. Vince or Triple H is still head of creative and seems to be the guy, but it doesn't seem to be like a McMahon legacy company anymore. It does seem like that WWE is going to look to thrive without Vince McMahon and without the McMahon name. It is interesting seeing how all of that, came to light and how the producers of this documentary kind of wrapped, everything together in that respect. It touches on AEW a little bit. It touches on the PG era a little bit. Really, this docuseries was really meant to put a spotlight on Vince McMahon, the person. Does it break any new ground for fans that already know a lot about Vince McMahon that is all kind of already out in the public? Not really. It's a very engaging, I will say that. But in the grand scheme of things, as a wrestling fan, I knew about all of this already. So if you are a hardcore wrestling fan nerd, if you go to WrestleManias, if you pay tickets to see AEW and WWE, if you follow New Japan, if you are a hardcore wrestling nerd, there is nothing new that you are going to see. Again, the docuseries itself is slickly produced. It is well put together. All the talking heads on there are great, and it's great that they give their own unfiltered opinions, but there's no new ground really being broken here, except for, some of the stuff about the sexual allegations. If you're not aware of those, they're horrible. I'm not going to repeat them. You can watch the docuseries. You can go online and read up about it, but they are horrible. And if he's found guilty of these crimes, then he deserves to rot in jail. That's it. Those are my opinions. If he's innocent, he's innocent. But there's a lot of evidence, overwhelming evidence against him. It's not really helping. If you are not a fan of professional wrestling, if you know very little about Vince McMahon, very little about the WWF or WWE, and you're just kind of starting on the ground floor, if you've heard about the WWE's move to Netflix, you're sort of curious about what professional wrestling is sort of like, at least through the lens of the WWE bubble. This is an entertaining documentary, and it does get into the headspace of Vince McMahon. He does reveal a lot of himself to the audience, for good or for ill. And I do appreciate that at times McMahon himself was very honest about who he is. He didn't hold no punches. He said, hey, at times you have to be ruthless. That's who I am. He talks about how there's 3 computers in his head that's always going off. One of those computers is always thinking about sex, which, that says a lot. It was really interesting seeing all the talking heads talk about Vince McMahon in their own ways. Some of them gushing, some of them being a little bit more critical, and some of them being extremely critical of Vince McMahon. And I think that is sort of the tapestry when you are, trying to assemble the life of this very complicated person. Vince McMahon, and Dave Meltzer said it, and I agree with him, Vince McMahon is perhaps the most important figure in the history of professional wrestling. It was his mind, it was his money, it was his vision that made professional wrestling explode into the pop culture phenomenon that it is. So while we as fans do owe a lot to Vince McMahon as a promoter, Tony Atlas comes on, he says that Vince McMahon is the greatest promoter of all time. There is still, I think, that we as fans need to take a step back and truly have a conversation with ourselves about Vince McMahon, the person. Vince McMahon, the promoter, yes, brought professional wrestling to the mainstream, and he's an important figure. As a human being, though, if we're talking about moral character, and I know people are going to have their own ideas, people are going to go, yeah, I can separate the person from the monster that he is. And yeah, speaking of that, before I get back to circle around, there are two particular instances where it talks about separating the man from the monster. This does get into the Chris Benoit murder-suicide. And again, Chris Nowinski is a talking head. He talks about CTE and concussions and everything like that. And, it was very interesting that the docuseries did not demonize Chris Benoit. It does say, hey, it was a tragedy. It was a horrible thing that happened. It does talk about, people's initial reactions to the Chris Benoit murders, the raw after, and then how things kind of snowballed and everything like that, and then how people were like, oh, it was roid rage. But then Nowinski does come on and was like, look, we studied his brain. His brain just was not working. Now, the one thing that I did not agree with, Stone Cold Steve Austin said that he didn't really believe in CTE, which kind of took me aback, especially as someone who got his bell rung by Owen Hart at SummerSlam 1997. And it's the reason why he has hadn't had neck fusion surgery. So the fact that he kind of mentioned that was a little bit on the disappointing side, but I mean, it is his opinion. So this does get into the whole Owen Hart situation at Over the Edge 1999, where he tragically died because the harness apparatus that he was on, he was supposed to come down from the rafters, it malfunctioned. And then, there's the whole thing about should the show have gone on. Vince has gone on record, he says this himself in the docuseries, that if it was him and he was the one who died, he would have expected the show to go on. This is one of the most controversial and polarizing things in terms of professional wrestling, whether or not Over the Edge 1999 should have continued after Owen Hart's passing. I have my own opinions. Every wrestling fan has their own opinions. But I did appreciate that it did, they did go to Bret Hart about it. And Bret Hart shared his very open and honest feelings. He said, this is how I felt at first about the whole situation. But, after they did the investigation and it was like, hey, the investigation came back and it was an accident, Bret was like, hey, that's how it was ruled, and I have to accept that. And he said that was a lot of, where a lot of his bitterness kind of melted away was from that. Obviously, Martha Hart, Owen Hart's wife, was not a talking head for obvious reasons, I would think. But it did get into that as well. Yeah, like I said, this docuseries was entertaining and was enjoyable as a wrestling fan, just kind of watching, the history of Vince McMahon and his rise to prominence and really his downfall. But yeah, like I said, no new ground. So if I was going to give this a rating, I would give this a low blockbuster, just because as a docuseries, it is very engaging, very entertaining. As a wrestling fan, it isn't nothing new that I wouldn't know, that you as a wrestling fan wouldn't already know. But for anyone coming in cold, this is going to be really engaging. And there's probably going to be things that you're going to be like, oh my God, when it comes to Vince McMahon. Also, I am going to say this. I do think that the release of this docuseries is also very strategic, because Monday Night Raw is moving to Netflix. Netflix paid $5 billion for the rights to Monday Night Raw. I think it's a 10-year deal or something like that. So Netflix, in essence, it feels like they released this docuseries to basically say, yes, we are going to have WWE content on our platform. And yes, we recognize that Vince McMahon was, keyword, was a part of WWE. But he is no longer part of that company. He has sold all of his stock. He has no say creatively or anything like that within the company. We have completely distanced ourselves from him. Here is the docuseries that we have released, airing out all of his dirty laundry, so you know that we are being completely transparent about it. So it seems like that Netflix released this docuseries to kind of get ahead of any potential bad press, where people would be like, hey, wait a second. And Netflix could be like, hey, he's not with us anymore. That's this sort of how I see things. It's a deft marketing ploy and PR strategy, but I think it's something that they probably needed to do, because if not, you would have like Nancy Grace doing her thing, being like, oh, Vince McMahon is still there. He's still there. So it is what it is. But, again, a very thoroughly entertaining, engaging docuseries. I definitely, recommend seeing it. But yeah, those are my initial thoughts and feelings on the docuseries Mr. McMahon on Netflix. What did you guys think of the docuseries? Share your thoughts, leave your comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you can get notifications as well. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care.